leftovers and a promise thee. Evening lights of the Grand Zenith Hotel washed the street in a warm golden glow as the charity dinner ended, and photographers packed their cameras while guests stepped into black, cars rolling like shadows across the smooth road. Damon crossed the paralyzed millionaire everyone whispered about, moved through the crowd in his sleek electric wheelchair, his jaw set and his expression cold, trying to escape before anyone asked for another forced smile. His shoulders were stiff from hours of pretending to enjoy conversations he barely heard, and his mind was already drifting toward the loneliness waiting at his penthouse, when a small voice rose behind him and cut through everything like a thread, pulling him back to earth. "Sir, excuse me. Can I have your leftovers if you are not taking them?" the girl asked, her tone steady, not begging, not trembling, just honest. Damon slowed, annoyed at first because people often asked him for money or selfies or favors. But when he turned, he saw a young black girl standing with a food container in one hand and a quiet determination in her eyes. She wore simple clothes, shoes slightly worn, hair pulled into a neat braid, but there was something strong in her stance, something he did not expect from someone so young. He raised a brow, wondering if this was another trick or some emotional scene for social media, but she did not move closer nor try to gain pity. She only pointed at the untouched plates the hotel staff were clearing into trash bags and said that the food could feed 15 people in her neighborhood. Damon let out a short laugh, one sharp breath that carried disbelief more than amusement. "Leftovers and a miracle," he muttered. But before he could roll away, she stepped forward just one step and spoke again. "If you give the food, I will give you something better," she said, her voice calm like it carried its own truth. Damon almost laughed again, yet something in her eyes made him pause, a strange steadiness that cut through his tiredness. So he asked her what she meant, and she replied that she had a miracle to trade. Not money, not magic, but something real enough to make him stand again if he was brave enough to try. Her words made a few people turn their heads, and Damon felt his throat tighten in irritation because everyone knew standing was impossible for him. Doctors had said it for years, reporters repeated it. Even he believed it when the nights grew heavy and long. He should have dismissed her, told security to move her aside, but curiosity cracked open something inside him, a small restless question that refused to stay silent. He asked her name and she said Amara. Then she asked if he would let the hotel pack the leftover food instead of letting it be thrown away. Damon sighed and agreed because the idea of saying no to those calm eyes somehow felt wrong. The staff packed the boxes and placed them gently into Amara's arms. She thanked them all with a soft smile that seemed too warm for the cold street around them before leaving. Amara looked at Damon once more and told him to come to the small community clinic on Rose Street the next morning at 9. She said the miracle he paid for with leftovers would be waiting for him there. Damon wanted to ask more, wanted to demand explanations, but she just walked away with quiet confidence, moving through the dim street with the food held close to her chest as if carrying hope itself. Damon watched her go, breathing slowly, feeling a strange pull inside him. He felt the laugh he had given earlier echoing in his chest like regret. He wondered if he had just wasted 10 minutes or if he had stepped into something he did not fully understand. The night air felt colder as he ordered his driver to take him home. Yet for the first time in months, he could not stop thinking about a simple girl who asked for leftovers and promised a miracle in return. And though he told himself he did not believe in miracles, he also knew he would be at that clinic when the sun rose again, because something in her voice refused to let him forget the laugh. That hurts. The next morning arrived softer than Damon expected, sunlight slipping through the gray curtains of his penthouse like gentle hands trying to wake someone who had forgotten what hope felt like. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, wondering why he had agreed to meet a girl he barely knew at a clinic he had never heard of. His assistants had already planned his entire day with meetings, reports, and interviews. Yet he canceled everything with a single message because something inside him would not stop whispering that he needed to go, and he hated that he could not explain why by 8:30. His car rolled through the narrow streets of Rose Street, a place far from the shining hotels he usually moved through. The buildings here were close and old with cracked paint, small shops and children playing on sidewalks. People looked at him with surprise as his wheelchair came out of the car. It was the kind of neighborhood where a millionaire never visited unless a camera crew followed. But he felt no cameras, only eyes that watched with curiosity and caution mixed in. The clinic was a faded one-story building painted light blue, but the color had weathered into a softer shade. The door was open, and he heard music inside. a steady rhythm with drums and soft guitar strings that somehow made the air feel alive. He entered slowly, unsure of what to expect, and the first thing he saw was a crowd of people sitting on plastic chairs, some with bandaged arms, some holding babies, some waiting for checkups they could barely afford. The place smelled like antiseptic and hope struggling to stay alive. Then he saw Amara. She stood near the back helping an old woman adjust her scarf, her braid hanging over her shoulder, her smile gentle. When she noticed him, she waved him in with a confidence that annoyed and impressed him at the same time. She walked over calmly and told him he was right on time. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but she simply guided him to another room, where the music grew louder and the air seemed heavier with purpose. Inside, a tall man with a trimmed beard and sharp eyes waited, wearing a simple white shirt and carrying a clipboard filled with handwritten notes. His presence felt different, not cold like a doctor in a rich hospital, but heavy like someone who had seen too many battles and refused to give up. This was Dr. Halim, the lead rehabilitation coach, and the moment he looked at Damon, he did not look like a man staring at a millionaire. He looked like a man staring at a challenge. Halim nodded once and said they could begin now. Damon almost laughed again because the room looked nothing like the advanced therapy centers he had visited before. There were resistance bands, wooden bars, a few mats, some old machines repaired more than once, and a cheap speaker playing rhythmic music. He looked around in disbelief and asked how any of this could help him walk, when millions of dollars of equipment had failed him. Halim only replied that miracles start from the mind before they reach the body, and that the girl who brought him here believed he still had a mind strong enough to try. Amara stood beside him, reminding him that pride breaks before progress starts, and her words stung even though her voice was soft. Damon wanted to argue, but something held him back. Halim helped him position his hands on parallel wooden bars while Amara turned the music slightly louder to match the rhythm of his breathing. Damon tried to lift his torso, but his arms trembled. His core tightened and his breath came out uneven. Sweat formed on his forehead even though he had only moved an inch, and shame rushed through him faster than any pain. He felt his old laugh echo inside him, the same laugh from the hotel, sharp and careless, and suddenly it hurt more than any physical ache, because now he realized how easy it was to laugh at something he did not understand. Halim adjusted his posture while Amara counted in a slow, calm rhythm. Damon tried again, and again he failed, his arms shaking until he almost slipped. Halim caught him, steady and patient, telling him failure was expected. Quitting was not. Damon wanted to leave, wanted to roll out of this room and forget all of it. But then he saw Amara watching him with eyes that did not pity him, eyes that believed he could do more than the world ever told him. And something in him refused to let those eyes down. He tried once more, pushing until his muscles burned. And this time he held the position for a full 3 seconds before collapsing back into his chair, breathing hard as if he had climbed a mountain. Amara called that a good start and offered him water, and for the first time Damon felt a heat rise in his chest that was not anger or shame. It was something close to wanting to prove her right. He left the clinic exhausted, but the echo of the music and the steady voice of the girl followed him all the way home, and he knew he would return tomorrow, even if his pride screamed against it, because the laugh he gave yesterday now felt like a weight he wanted to lift from his life. The deal. Nobody believes. The next morning, Damon returned to the Rose Street Clinic with a strange heaviness in his chest. Not fear, not pride. Something in between that pushed him forward even though he did not fully understand why he was coming back. His driver asked twice if he was sure, because his schedule was full and important meetings waited. But Damon waved him off and rolled out of the car with determination that surprised even himself. The street buzzed with early morning energy. Children running with backpacks, vendors calling out prices, and small shops lifting their shutters with hope for a better day. As he entered the clinic, Amara was already there, sweeping the floor with quick, easy motions as if she had done it every morning of her life. She greeted him with a bright warmth that felt almost unfair in a place that fought so hard to survive. She told him her mother had cleaned these halls at night for years, and that the clinic had saved more people than anyone counted. Damon nodded, absorbing every detail, because the more he saw, the more he realized he had lived far away from the world that needed hope the most. Halim soon arrived and wasted no time guiding Damon into the therapy room where the music again pulsed gently like a heartbeat in the air. Damon braced himself, expecting more painful attempts, but instead Halim surprised him by asking a question that felt heavier than any exercise. He asked what Damon truly wanted from life now. Not fame, not business wins, not charity headlines, but something raw and real. Damon looked away, unable to answer right away, because he had not asked himself that question since the accident that took his legs and shattered his direction. Amara stepped closer, her voice steady as she reminded him that every miracle begins with a decision, and if he wanted to stand again or even hold a stronger body than yesterday, he needed commitment, not curiosity. Halim then explained the program properly. It was a community-built rehabilitation system made from recycled tools, donated equipment, shared knowledge, and relentless human effort. Each patient trained not only for themselves but for the next person who would come after them. And Damon felt something stir in him as he looked around at the people who used to be strangers, but now felt like witnesses to his struggle. Amara then made the bold offer she had hinted at earlier. She told Damon that if he agreed to fund the clinic for just 3 months, not as a donation but as an investment in human strength, they would push for a change in his body that no doctor had guaranteed before, a change that required grit more than money. She asked him to follow the program without missing a single session, and trust the process even when he wanted to give up. Her voice never shook and her eyes never wavered. And Damon realized this girl spoke with more conviction than most adults he had met in the richest boardrooms. Damon thought carefully, feeling the weight of pride pressing on one side and the desire for redemption pressing on the other. He finally agreed to the deal, signing a small grant on his tablet while Halim watched with quiet approval. But Damon added conditions. He said he wanted cameras installed to document progress and keep everything transparent, because he knew the world would question his motives and call it a publicity stunt if he did not show the truth. Halim nodded, saying transparency only strengthens trust. And Amara smiled as if she had already expected him to take this path. Word spread quickly through the city that the paralyzed millionaire had joined a struggling community clinic, and online comments began to flood social platforms. Some mocked him, saying he was desperate for attention. Others accused him of using the poor for a hidden agenda. A short clip from the hotel where he had laughed at Amara resurfaced, edited to make him look cold and cruel. It stung him deeply, more than he admitted, because he saw himself in that video, but not the man he wanted to be. The backlash grew harsh within hours. His board members called him, demanding explanations, warning that investors would panic, insisting he focus on business, not charity. Damon listened quietly, then turned the phone off, because for the first time in years, he wanted to choose something not for profit but for purpose. He returned to the therapy room with his jaw tight and his heart burning, ready to prove himself not to the world but to the girl who believed in him when he did not believe in himself. Halim placed him back at the bars and told him to lift again, this time with toned music and Amara counting in a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Damon pushed through pain and frustration, feeling his body tremble, sweat dripping, breath sharp, but he did not stop. Not even when the room blurred for a moment, because he remembered that video and the shame it brought, and he wanted to bury that version of himself forever. When he finally collapsed into his chair, shaking and exhausted, Amara whispered that today was stronger than yesterday, and tomorrow would be stronger still. As Damon left the clinic that evening, he realized the deal he made was not just financial. It was a promise to himself, a chance to rebuild what life had taken, and though the world doubted him, he felt something powerful settling inside him, the beginning of a fight he would not run from again, grit and small miracles. The next week unfolded like a long road shaped by sweat and stubborn hope, and every morning Damon found himself returning to the Rose Street Clinic before his mind had time to talk him out of it. The air always carried the familiar rhythm of the cheap speaker, playing beats that felt like a pulse pushing the room forward, and Halim stood waiting with his clipboard and sharp eyes ready to work. Amara usually arrived first, wiping the equipment, setting the mats straight, arranging resistance bands in a row with the care of someone preparing holy ground, and when Damon entered, she greeted him with a warm smile that somehow made the old building feel brighter. The training began simple but harsh. Halim tightened Damon's posture again and again, guiding his shoulders back and his chest forward until Damon felt muscles he had forgotten he possessed. They used resistance bands cut from old tires. They used blocks carved by volunteers. They used wooden bars polished by countless hands. And every tool carried the marks of someone who fought here before him. At first, Damon doubted everything. How could something so humble succeed where expensive machines had failed? But Halim never backed down, and Amara never let him sink into doubt. She counted every rhythm steadily, matching his breath to the music as if shaping a new heartbeat inside him. On the third day, he felt something small shift inside his core. Not movement, not a miracle, just strength. A slight tightening that did not collapse as quickly as before. Halim called it the first spark, and Amara clapped lightly as if he had climbed the tallest mountain. And though Damon tried to hide it, warmth spread through his chest because he realized progress did not always roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispered like a quiet promise that tomorrow would be stronger. As days passed, the clinic became familiar to him in ways he never expected. He met the people who once stood in line for the leftover hotel food. A single mother with 2 children who hugged him shyly, an old tailor who fought back tears while thanking him, a young man recovering from an accident who trained beside Damon with fierce determination. And the more he learned their stories, the more he saw the world through a lens he had never dared to look through before. These people were not charity cases, they were warriors fighting battles without applause or money or cameras. And standing among them made Damon feel both humbled and alive. Slowly, he began supporting the clinic in quiet ways without being asked. He brought in new mats, new gloves, a better speaker, and even though he could have bought expensive equipment worth millions, he chose only what Halim approved because he did not want to break the spirit of the place. The clinic was built from community strength, not luxury, and he respected that now. Volunteers soon noticed the changes and started helping more. Cleaning, painting, even cooking meals for patients, and the building that once felt tired now breathed with new color and new energy. Training grew harder each day. Halim raised the bars little by little, and Amara's voice became the steady drum guiding Damon's rhythm. He learned to pull, twist, lift, and hold until sweat soaked his shirt and his breaths came out deep and heavy, and every time he felt his strength failing, Amara reminded him that miracles are built from patience, not speed. Her words settled deep inside him, turning his frustration into determination. One evening after a long session, Halim placed Damon at the center of the room and asked him to attempt a controlled lift, using only upper strength and core alignment. Damon closed his eyes, gripping the bars tightly, feeling every muscle tremble as he pushed upward, and for one breathtaking second he rose higher than he ever had before. Not a full rise, not a stand, but a moment where gravity loosened its grip on him. Amara gasped softly and Halim nodded with pride, saying this was the kind of miracle people ignore because it feels small, but small miracles grow into big ones when watered every day. As Damon sat back into his chair, breathing hard but smiling in a way he had not smiled in years, he realized something had begun to shift inside him more powerful than any muscle. He was no longer fighting just for himself. He was fighting for the people who believed in him, for the girl who looked at him like he was capable of more, for the community that gave him a purpose he had lost long ago, and for the version of himself he wanted to rebuild when he left the clinic that night. The sky above Rose Street glowed with fading sunset colors, and for the first time since his accident, he felt hope not as a distant dream, but as a quiet companion walking beside him, and he knew the next day would bring more pain, more sweat, more challenges, but he also knew he would face them all because the small miracles had begun, and they were growing stronger with every breath he took. The backlash, the days kept moving forward with the same steady rhythm of music and sweat, and Damon's progress grew like a slow rising wave, gentle at first and then stronger with each passing hour. But outside the clinic walls, a very different storm was building, one made not of rain or thunder but of opinions and power, and it waited quietly for its moment to strike. It began with a message from his board, short and sharp, warning him that his involvement with the Rose Street Clinic was causing confusion among investors. They claimed the media coverage of his training sessions made him look reckless and unfocused. They insisted he return to his office immediately to stabilize the company image. Damon ignored the message at first, telling himself that his commitments here mattered more, but soon more calls followed, each carrying heavier pressure, and he felt the weight of his old world closing in on the new life he had just begun building. The final blow came when one of his business partners, a man named Victor Lang, leaked the contract Damon had signed for the clinic, leaking it not as a gesture of transparency but as a weapon. Newspapers twisted the story into headlines that made him look desperate or foolish, claiming he threw money at a run-down clinic in exchange for a miracle cure that would never happen. Talk shows mocked him, calling his determination a midlife crisis, and social media erupted in heated arguments, some supporting him but many tearing him apart without mercy. The clip from the charity dinner resurfaced again, the moment he had laughed at Amara edited with harsh music to paint him as cruel and arrogant, and Damon felt his stomach twist every time he saw the video. because he could not erase that moment. He could only try to become someone better than the man in that clip, but the world refused to let him forget. Inside the clinic, however, things remained steady. Halim continued training him with the same fierce patience, and Amara offered support without asking him any uncomfortable questions. Yet Damon felt their eyes notice the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his breath, the way he looked at his phone more than usual, and finally Halim asked directly if the outside world was shaking him. Damon stayed silent for a moment before admitting that he was being pressured to leave. Amara listened quietly, her expression calm but her eyes sharp with concern. Then she reminded him that every path worth walking demands sacrifice, and that some storms must be faced head-on instead of avoided. Her words burned inside him like a spark reigniting a dying flame, but the truth remained. The clinic needed his funding to survive, and if the board cut off the grant, the lights would shut down, the equipment would be gone, and the people fighting for their futures here would be left stranded. Damon knew the building was fragile. The rent was late, the volunteers were stretched thin, and even the new equipment he brought was nothing compared to the monthly costs that kept the doors open. Reporters soon appeared outside the clinic, crowding the entrance with cameras and microphones, asking if he was using the poor for publicity, asking if he planned to abandon the project, asking if he really believed he could stand again. Amara stepped outside before Damon could respond and spoke with a courage that stunned everyone. She declared that the millionaire had kept every promise so far, and that the clinic believed in him even if the world did not. Her voice did not shake, her words did not crumble, and her loyalty shone like a shield covering him in a moment when he felt most exposed. Her statement spread online within hours, and though some mocked her, many admired her fire, calling her brave for standing up to powerful voices. Damon watched the clip that night and felt something rise in his chest, a fierce mixture of pride and responsibility. She had placed her name and her heart on the line for him, and he would not let her stand alone. The next morning he arrived at the clinic earlier than usual, and with a firm calmness he told Halim and Amara that he was doubling the funding. Not just continuing it. He said the board could rage, investors could shout, partners could threaten, but he refused to back away now. He chose purpose over fear, and if the world wanted a spectacle, he would give them one, not of failure but of relentless human strength. The city took notice, and so did the people who once mocked him. Meanwhile, inside the therapy room, the rhythm of music continued, and Damon began training with a fire so bright it startled even Halim. Each pull, each lift, each trembling hold felt heavier but also more meaningful, because now he fought not only for his own recovery but for the clinic, for Amara, for the community that had believed in him before he believed in himself. By the end of the week he realized something powerful. The backlash no longer scared him. It had sharpened him, pushed him, forged him into someone who would not run. The boy who had once hidden behind wealth was gone, replaced by a man willing to stand for something even before he could stand on his own legs. The night of the storm. The sky turned dark far earlier than usual that evening, heavy clouds rolling in like giant shadows swallowing the horizon, and Damon felt a strange pressure in the air as he finished another exhausting training session. His arms trembled, his shirt clung to his skin, and his breath came out in long, uneven waves. But Halim said the progress was real, the core engagement was stronger, and the tremble meant the muscles were waking again. Amara handed him a towel with her usual warm smile, though even she kept glancing outside as a distant rumble echoed across Rose Street. By the time the sun disappeared, the storm had already begun whispering its warnings, wind pushing against the doors, loose signs rattling, leaves swirling in frantic circles. Damon's driver called to suggest they leave early, but Damon refused because he wanted to help lock down the clinic before the storm hit in full. Volunteers rushed around stacking boxes, securing equipment, and checking the windows which were old and fragile. Halim moved quickly too, shouting instructions over the rising wind while Amara tied curtains and taped cracks to keep the rain from sneaking in. Within minutes the rain fell hard and fast, hitting the roof like a drum that refused to stop. The streetlights flickered, the walls shook, and water began slipping under the door in thin shimmering lines. Damon felt his chest tighten with unease because he knew the clinic could not afford damage. Not now. Not when they had just begun to hope again. Halim ordered everyone to lift the equipment onto tables, and Damon insisted on helping even though he could not climb or lift the heaviest items. He directed volunteers, pushed light stands, reorganized mats, and refused to be a burden. Suddenly, the back door burst open with a violent blast of wind, rain sweeping in like icy fingers, scattering papers and knocking over a shelf. A shout echoed as one of the machines near the corner slipped off its stand and began sliding across the wet floor. Amara ran forward with instinctive courage, and Damon rolled after her despite Halim yelling to stay back. Together with 2 volunteers, they managed to pull the machine onto a higher platform. But the floor was already flooding fast, water rising inch by inch as the storm pounded harder and harder. Lightning flashed outside, lighting the entire room in a blinding white burst. And in that moment, Damon's wheelchair skidded on the water, the wheels losing grip, his body tilting dangerously to the side. He felt his heart seize with fear as gravity pulled him downward. But before he fell completely, he felt 2 hands grab his arms with firm, steady strength. It was Amara, soaked from head to toe, hair dripping, eyes glowing with determination. She pulled him upright with more force than he expected, and for a heartbeat he felt something powerful inside his body respond. Not a miracle, not a stand, but a deep, tight contraction running through his core like a spark of life. The storm outside screamed louder. The clinic lights flickered again, and finally the power failed completely, plunging everything into darkness except for the soft glow of a few phones volunteers pulled from their pockets. Halim ordered everyone to move to the higher side of the room, so they lifted the mats and machines onto tables, benches, and counters, working in the dim glow of phone flashlights. The air was thick with the smell of rain and fear and stubborn hope, but nobody stopped because this clinic had faced storms before, and storms had never stopped them as they worked. Damon noticed something stunning. The moment Amara had grabbed him, his body had reacted as if fighting to stay upright, his core tightening with an instinct he had not felt in years. He sat in the chair, breathing heavily, processing the strange new fire burning in his muscles. Amara knelt beside him, wiping rain from her forehead, and asked if he was hurt. Damon shook his head slowly and whispered that he felt something different, something strong. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded with a proud smile as if she understood even without hearing every word. When the flooding finally slowed and the storm began to lose its rage, the clinic stood messy and soaked but still alive. Everyone was exhausted, clothes dripping, hair plastered to skin, breath heavy, yet no one complained. Halim walked over and placed a gentle hand on Damon's shoulder, saying storms reveal the truth of a person. And tonight Damon had proven that he was no longer a man running from his own life. Damon sat silent for a moment, overwhelmed by everything, and then for the first time since his accident he felt tears fill his eyes, not from pain or humiliation, but from the fear of almost losing this place. The walk and the wonder. The morning of the reopening came with a sky washed clean by the storm, soft light spilling over Rose Street like a blessing, and the clinic doors stood open wide as neighbors gathered with faces bright and hopeful. Inside, the walls smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. The floors shone, the machines were dry and humming again, and balloons in simple colors floated near the ceiling, as if the building itself wanted to smile. Halim moved through the room with calm assurance, checking straps and bars and settings, while volunteers taped extension cords and adjusted the music so the rhythm would cradle every breath. And Amara placed a small hand-lettered sign near the door that read, "Welcome home," because this place had always been more than a clinic. It was a promise to everyone who refused to give up. Cameras lined the back wall, and a few reporters whispered into their microphones. But today their tone felt different, less sharp, more curious, because the story had grown larger than gossip. People had seen the storm. They had seen the community lift their own clinic, and they had seen the man who once laughed fight like a soldier in the dark. Damon arrived quietly, dressed in a plain shirt and sneakers. No designer suit, no entourage, only focused eyes and a steady breath. He looked at the room and felt the same heat in his chest that had grown day by day, a mix of fear and hope and stubborn courage, the kind that makes a person step forward even when everything shakes inside. Halim guided him to the center of the room where a lightweight support frame waited, a frame designed not to carry him but to steady him. The difference mattered, because this was not a lift, this was a test of will. Amara stood on his right side holding a small metronome speaker that matched the clinic beat, her braid tucked behind her shoulder, her voice ready, steady, warm, and Damon curled his fingers around the bars, feeling the grain of the metal, the cool touch, the promise of pressure and pain. Then he closed his eyes for one long breath and let the music settle into his body like a second heart. Halim counted gently, and Amara echoed the count. both voices shaping a path for him to follow. Damon pulled through his arms and tightened his core. Fire shot across his abdomen and back. His legs felt heavy as stone, and yet beneath the weight there was a thread of life, a faint line of connection that had grown thicker with every day in this room. He rose an inch, then another, elbows shaking, jaw tight, breath controlled, the frame supporting but not saving him. And then he found a balance point that had never held before, a place where his body felt like a house rebuilt on stronger ground. A tremble ran through him, but he stayed upright. The room went silent except for the beat of the music, the soft click of cameras, and the whisper of the crowd. Amara moved her hand closer but did not touch, her eyes drawing a path forward as if her gaze could become a bridge. Damon shifted his weight. The first step had lived in his mind for months, a ghost made of fear and desire. Now it waited in front of him like a door he needed to open. He inhaled and allowed the beat to lead him. His knee tightened, his heel scraped the mat, and then his foot slid forward the smallest distance. But it was forward, it was a step in truth and time. And the room filled with a soft wave of breath as people realized what they had just seen. Halim whispered for him to hold, to breathe, to trust. And Damon did, lifting the other foot slowly, his whole body shaking, his mind shouting, hold, 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 like a prayer. And then the second step found the mat. One foot after another, a rhythm made from pain and patience, he took a third step, and a fourth half step when balance began to tilt. Halim steadied the frame with a careful touch. Amara kept the count, and Damon's eyes filled with heat that did not fall, because today there was no room for anything but forward. When he settled back into the chair, the room exhaled together, cheers rising not like a roar of victory but like a chorus of relief and awe. Neighbors clapped. Volunteers cried without shame, cameras clicked with a new respect, and Damon leaned back with a shaking smile that felt like sunrise after a long night. Halim squeezed his shoulder and said the work would continue, that steps become strides when tomorrow repeats today. And Amara finally let a tear slip as she whispered that he had kept his promise to come back stronger. Damon looked at her and nodded, because there were no words large enough for what she had given him. He asked for the microphones then, not for a speech crafted by a publicist, but for words that lived in his chest and needed to be given away. He announced a multi-year fund for the clinic, a permanent grant that protected salaries and rent and power and upgrades. He announced scholarships in Amara's name for young caregivers and community health students, and he announced a citywide recovery network that would link hospitals and small clinics and neighborhood centers so that no one would be left alone with their pain again. His voice shook, but it did not break. And for once the cameras captured not a performance but a man telling the truth about what had saved him. Outside, the old clip of his careless laugh began to fade from feeds as a new video took its place, the video of a community holding its breath, while a man took his first steps with the help of strangers who had become family. And across the city people watched and felt a quiet shift inside, a reminder that miracles do not arrive dressed in gold. They come wrapped in work and music and hands that refuse to let you fall. Damon looked around the room and saw faces that had carried him through his darkest hours. He saw Halim with his iron patience. He saw volunteers with paint on their hands. He saw Amara, whose steady voice had become his compass. And he understood at last that standing is not measured only by legs. It is measured by the people who stand with you when you cannot. As evening light slid across the clinic floor, Amara placed the metronome on the table and told him that tomorrow they would try again. Maybe one more step, maybe two, maybe none. But they would try, and Damon smiled in quiet acceptance. Because he was no longer chasing a single moment. He was living a new life built from moments like this. He glanced at the door where the welcome home sign still rested, and he realized the sign spoke to him as much as to anyone else. Home was not the penthouse above the city. Home was a room alive with rhythm and courage and shared breath. And as the music played softly once more, the man who once laughed at miracles rolled forward with a heart that finally knew how to stand. A new beginning. The days that followed moved gently yet powerfully through the city, whispers turning into stories and stories turning into inspiration as people replayed the moment Damon took his first steps. Not as a miracle from the sky, but as a miracle built from community hands and shared courage. The clinic felt different now, brighter, stronger, steadier, as if the walls themselves remembered the night of the storm, and decided to carry every heartbeat with pride, patients arriving earlier than before. Volunteers doubling their efforts, music echoing through the halls with a new kind of rhythm, one shaped by hope rather than desperation. Damon continued training with the same quiet fire that had grown inside him from the first day he met Amara. Every morning he arrived with determination carved into his breath and purpose woven into each movement. Sometimes he stepped forward with confidence and sometimes his legs trembled until Halim steadied him. But he never turned away from the bars again. He never let old fear return, and each evening when he left he felt his heart walking even when his legs could not yet follow. Amara changed too, not in the softness of her voice or the steadiness of her eyes, but in the way she carried herself. People in the neighborhood began greeting her with admiration. Children followed her asking questions about strength and kindness. Mothers thanked her. Fathers nodded with respect. And the clinic staff treated her not as a girl who once asked for leftovers, but as the spark that saved their future. Yet she remained humble, sweeping the floors, arranging the mats, bringing warm meals for volunteers, always working with the quiet grace that had first drawn Damon into this journey. One evening, as the sun settled behind the buildings, casting long, warm shadows across the clinic floor, Damon asked her why she had approached him that night outside the hotel. Why she had believed in someone she had never met. Amara looked at him with the same calm that changed his life, and said she had not seen a millionaire. She had seen a man who needed purpose the way her community needed food. She had seen a broken heart beneath the polished image, and she believed that sometimes two broken pieces can help each other heal. Damon felt her words settle deeply inside him, filling the last empty corner of his past with light he never expected to feel again. In time, the city council recognized the clinic. Reporters wrote stories that carried truth instead of mockery, and investors who once doubted Damon now stepped forward not for profit, but for impact. And the small blue building on Rose Street became known as the Heart of Hope, a place where people rebuilt their strength piece by piece, breath by breath, rhythm by rhythm, guided by a team that refused to let anyone feel alone in their struggle. Months later, on a quiet afternoon when the clinic buzzed with laughter and music, Damon stood at the bars again, gripping them with confidence. Amara beside him counting softly, Halim watching with a proud smile. And this time when Damon lifted himself, the tremble faded faster. The balance came smoother. The second step arrived with less strain, and the third step felt almost natural. He walked halfway across the mat with the room silent in awe. Then he paused and looked back at the people who had carried him through the darkest storm of his life, and he understood that recovery is not measured in distance but in courage. He reached out, took Amara's hand gently, and thanked her not for saving him, but for reminding him that he was still worth saving. She smiled with warm eyes and told him that every person deserves a chance to rise, and he had chosen to rise even when the world tried to pull him down. Her words wrapped around him like a final lesson, simple and true, as evening light washed the clinic once more. Damon walked 2 more steps, steady and sure, the music rising slightly as if celebrating each inch he conquered, and in that moment he realized that miracles do not end at the moment they appear. They continue growing quietly, shaping new lives long after the applause fades. And so the man who once lived in loneliness found family in a place built from kindness, and the girl who once asked for leftovers became the guide who helped him find his future. And together they proved that strength grows where hearts meet, and hope blooms where people choose to believe in one another. The end.